Welcome to the latest episode of Going Homesteady. Glad to have you with us again. I want to talk a little bit today about a really tricky subject because it kind of brings together the two things we're not supposed to talk about in polite company, which is religion and politics. And I want to talk a little bit today about the relationship between the Christian faith and the government. I want to start here. Romans 13 is clear and straightforward in giving Christians the command to obey those who are the civil magistrate, and in fact describes the civil magistrate as God's ministry of justice. That's a good thing. They have a job, they have a calling from God. That's their vocation, to be ministers of justice, and Christians should not push back against that. But there's a problem, not with what God planned, but how it works out with sinful men. You see, when God gives the civil government what it calls in Romans 13 the power of the sword, it gives the government authority to execute justice against wrongdoers. That's, again, the language of Romans 13. But when the government is given the power of the sword, the problem is now they've got a sword. They're also, just like the rest of us who need to be restrained by government because we are sinners, at the end of the day, you go down to the end of that sword, and who's holding it but another sinner? And that creates problems. And you can feel some sort of inner tension, particularly for Christians in our day and in our nation. That is because we have a nation that was founded on Christian principles, because we have a nation that has been exceptional in receiving God's grace and really has changed the world. It's easy to almost make an idol out of the state because those on the political left seem to be so opposed to the state. We tend to be defensive and want to support the state. And also because of Romans 13. I get all of that. But we have to understand that the Bible's perspective on the government is far more nuanced than that. In a moment, I'm going to take you to a particular text. But before I do that, I want to tell you a story about something I learned in Israel, specifically in Caesarea Philippi. I was on a tour of Israel, and our tour guide, who was an evangelical Christian gentleman, led us into Caesarea Philippi. And as we're walking into the town, right in the center of town, there is this river that flows right through it. And right where the river starts, it comes out of, or rather, flows into this great outcropping of rock that's at the bottom of this great hill. And where it comes right over the river, the outcropping of rock is round, and then right when it gets to about the river level, it goes like that. It goes down straight, perpendicular to the ground. So it looked like this. And our guide tells us that Caesarea Philippi in the days of Jesus was known for two things. One, it was a Roman garrison city. What that means is Roman soldiers lived there, occupying soldiers. They stayed there, and then they would go to their daily chores or jobs around various parts of Israel, enforcing Roman law. So you had all these soldiers there. Think of a town built around a military base like Fort Dix, or I don't even know any other ones, but there are, they're all over the place. But imagine this is what this city is. Well, that's one thing that it was. The other thing that it was that it was the center for the worship of the Greek god Pan. Now, if you know anything about the Romans and the Greeks and their system of gods and their worship systems, you know that, like many religions back in that day, they were built around kind of the pursuit of sensual pleasures. They were temple prostitutes and those kinds of things. Well, out of all of that, the if you will, the wildest parties. Think of it like, I guess, the Greeks on a college campus, right? Every fraternity is going to have their parties, but then there's that one fraternity that's just wilder than the rest. Well, that's the Pan worshipers. They were wilder than the rest, and the center of their worship was Caesarea Philippi. Okay. Now, what we know of Caesarea Philippi is built around a famous conversation from the Bible where Jesus asked the disciples first, "Who do men say that I am?" And they give their various answers. Some say Elijah, some say John the Baptist, some say this, some say that. And then Jesus says, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter has his moment in the sun. Peter says, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus begins to praise Peter, "And thou art Petros," which means rock. "And on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." Now, Roman Catholics think that Peter is the rock on which the church is built, but Peter was anything but rock steady, because just a few moments later he's going to be called Satan by Jesus. The reality is that the rock upon which the church is built is the proclamation that Jesus is the Christ. But notice what else Jesus said: "The gates of hell will not prevail against it." Have you ever wondered about that expression? The gates of hell will not prevail. You know, I've never served in a war, but I've watched a lot of war movies, and I've never once seen a battle where people were afraid of gates coming at them. What in the world does Jesus mean by the gates of hell will not prevail? Gates sit still. Well, that's true. However, you might be surprised to learn that this rock outcropping I talked about, it goes round and then straight down. Can you see the shape? This is the shape of a skull. And in fact, right where the eye sockets would be on the skull, there were kind of indentations on this rock where the eye sockets would be. And the Roman soldiers not only lived in this city, not only worshiped the god Pan in this city, but it was their habit when they had to kill, particularly a Jewish dissident of one kind or another, or a criminal, that the way they would dispose of the body would be to take it to Caesarea Philippi and toss it into the river that flows into this rock, and then the river disappears underground. Convenient way to get rid of a body. And once you realize that, you realize, oh, well, now wouldn't be surprised if maybe the Jews called this very spot the gates of hell. So what Jesus is saying to Peter in this particular spot is the truth that I am the Christ will overcome the false worship of Rome, and specifically Pan, and the reign of Rome over the world. Jesus wins. Jesus overcomes. Now, he does not overcome, friends, by taking up sword and spear and going to war. And in fact, that's where Peter makes this mistake, because it's the same place that Jesus says, now look, when we go back in, I'm going to be handed over to the Gentiles, and they're going to do this, and they're going to crucify me. And Peter says that famous oxymoronic line, "No, Lord." You can't say no, Lord. You can say no, not Lord, or you can say yes, Lord, but you can't say no, Lord. Because the Lord is the one you're supposed to submit to. He says, "No, Lord," and Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan," because you don't understand. He doesn't understand that the way of conquest is through sacrifice and through Jesus' death. Now, the reality of that truth doesn't change the fact that conquest is real, which brings us to the text I wanted to read to you. If you want to have an understanding of, again, that nuance and that challenge of understanding how governments and the church relate, and you'll see this in Psalm 2, where we read, "Why do the heathen rage, and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, Let us break their bonds asunder and cast away their cords from us." You see, it's not just that the government is misguided. It's not just that governments err. It's that they are in rebellion against the living God. It goes all the way back at least to the Tower of Babel, where you have men unified in their distrust and hatred of the living God. And they're trying to wrest him from his throne. And so this is what the psalmist is talking about. The heathen raging, they're working together, they're plotting a vain thing. Verse 4, he that sitteth in the heavens, that is the Lord, he that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. So it's just like at Babel, they're going to make a tower that reaches all the way up to heaven. And when God comes to deal with it, it says he went down to it. He didn't have to look out his window, and there it was. He had to go down to this tower that was supposed to reach up to him. Here, there's this plot, there's this hatred, and God who sits in the heavens laughs and holds these people in derision. He doesn't take them seriously at all. Verse 5, then he shall speak unto them in his wrath, and vex them in his sore displeasure. He's going to let them know. He's going to give them what for. And this is part of what he's going to say. Yet have I set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord has said to me, thou art my son. This day have I begotten thee. Oh, this has got something to do with Jesus, doesn't it? The Father says to Jesus, ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. The problem with the rapacious, growing state is that they fail to acknowledge the reign of Christ over all things. I said this a week or so ago about how in the 1st and 2nd centuries, when Christians were put to death by the Romans, it wasn't because of a disagreement on theology. It was because of a disagreement on politics. Because the very first Christian confession of faith was Christos ho Kyrios, which is the Greek for Christ is King, Christ is Lord. Whereas Rome said you can worship whoever you want, you can believe whatever you want, knock yourself out. All we ask of you is that you, while you're doing what you want, you have to come and confess Kaiser ho Kyrios. Caesar is Lord. And all those Christians who were hung along the Appian Way, who lit up Nero's gardens, who were fed to the lions in the stadiums in the gladiatorial games, they all died because they refused to say, Caesar is Lord. Well, verse 9, thou shalt, this is the Father speaking to the Son, thou shalt break them, the them is the nations that rage, thou shalt break them with a rod of iron, thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. This is the judgment of the living God. This is not God praising and honoring the ones he called to be his ministers of justice, but him bringing justice to them for their failure to enact justice. Verse 10, be wise now, therefore, O ye kings, be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Okay, here's the correction. Here's the instruction. What do you need to do? Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish from the way when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all they that put their trust in him. This is vitally important for us to take into account when we're thinking through how we are to relate to the government. This is not a call to raise up arms and revolt against the government. This is a call to prophetically call the government to repent and kiss the Son, lest he be angry. Now, if you haven't already, click subscribe and shared. If you haven't clicked like and left a comment, if you haven't done those things, I don't know if I want to say you need to repent, but I'm vexed, I will say that. Please do so. As I said last time, share this with your friends. This is, as we talked about from the very beginning, some of the underlying principles that lead us as we think through how to live more peaceable lives in an age of hostility against Jesus and his church. So please help us not only continue to grow and learn and study, but help us to increase our reach by sharing this YouTube channel with your friends. Thank you again for tuning in.